Some lawmakers in Washington are putting a local New York election on the national stage. It's the race for district attorney in Queens County. Tomorrow, Democrats will pick their nominee out of 6 contenders. This weekend, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez rallied for candidate Tiffany Caban. The public defender has also received the endorsements of Senators Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. She's running a progressive campaign to tackle criminal justice reform. It's a plan Sanders said last week was, quote, taking on the entire political establishment. And Tiffany Caban joins me now from Queens to discuss her campaign. Tiffany, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So for a long time here in New York, as you know, the broken windows theory of policing and prosecuting was the norm. The idea that by going after small but visible crimes, you can prevent more serious criminal activity. But you don't see it that way. Why?
No, I don't. You know, what we've seen is broken windows policing and prosecution really be weaponized against our Black and brown, our low income, our immigrant communities, and it hasn't resulted in increased public safety. And so what we should be doing is focusing on the root causes of crime, understanding that widespread destabilization drives crimes, whether it is low-level, nonviolent, or violent offenses. So I've been practicing as a public defender representing folks who can't afford to defend themselves. And, you know, what I see in my practice are folks being criminalized for their substance use disorder rather than prosecuting doctors who overprescribe opioids, or people being prosecuted for their homelessness rather than prosecuting bad landlords who unlawfully evict, or predatory lenders who steal homes. And so really taking this a step back and kind of seeing, like, where are the destabilizing forces coming from that drive unlawful behavior, and addressing those, and then providing supports and services to folks, understanding that, again, stability equals public safety in so many different ways.
I do also want to ask you about your view on prostitution, because some critics argue that decriminalizing sex work could contribute to an increase in sex trafficking. First of all, what is your view? Are you concerned that any proposals could give rise, for instance, to an increase in non-consensual sex work?
So I support decriminalization of sex work, and that's from having direct conversations with our sex work community, understanding that this is not only an economic issue, but a human rights issue. We have been unsuccessful, at least here in Queens, in combating trafficking cases and combating cases of coercion and combating sexual assault against our sex work community. You know, it's really important to understand who's doing the work and why. In a lot of ways, sex work is survival work. You know, here in Queens, for example, we have a large trans Latina communication community that is engaging in sex work. We have migrant workers in Flushing working in our massage parlors. And these are folks that are already vulnerable, already marginalized, who are experiencing barriers in areas of housing, job opportunities, healthcare. And so we're seeing a situation where this is the work that they're doing to put food on their table, and that they're being criminalized in a manner that when they are trafficked, when they are coerced, when they are sexually assaulted, because they're also being prosecuted and criminalized, they're not going and getting help or have access to health care services, access to law enforcement support. And so through decriminalization, you make it safe for survivors and victims to go to law enforcement and be the witnesses that are needed to hold these traffickers who are doing harm accountable. And you know, the reason why you decriminalize also is to say, well, you have to decriminalize customers as well, because what we're seeing happen is that when you only say, well, we're not going to prosecute sex workers, it incentivizes a climate where our sex work community is being over-policed, right? They are being harassed by police officers to get information on clients, and it's resulting in increased violence between civilians and our law enforcement folks.
So I just want to make sure I understand. You would not go after the sex workers themselves. You would not go after their customers. Would you go after the brothel owners?
We would go after people who are trafficking, who are coercing people into the sex work trade, and we would go after everybody who is committing sexual assaults or assaults. These are things that would never be legalized. These are things that we would absolutely prioritize the prosecution for. But again, we have to change the approach in dealing with this, because the one that we're using now just has been woefully unsuccessful.
I want to take a step back for a moment. Your race is receiving national attention. You have been endorsed by Senators Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Have you worked with them at all on your platform in any way, shape, or form?
No, actually, I think the endorsements sort of speak to, I think, values aligning. I think it speaks to an acknowledgement around this grassroots movement that we have built. Our policies are the product of sitting down with folks who have been directly impacted by our justice system and centering their experiences. And then my work as a public defender, understanding that one of the reasons why I ran was that so many times we saw these so-called progressive policies that were supposed to be helping our communities, and seeing that my clients, who were the exception to the rule before these policies, continue to be the exception to the rule. So it's really driven by making sure that policies are having the intended impacts, and that there are policies that really forward and center, public safety and public health outcomes.
I know you're focused on your own contest, but I have to ask you, who are you supporting in the Democratic primary?
Right now I am listening and waiting and hearing as folks are drawing out more of their policy platforms. I'm certainly very, very impressed and excited about what's been put out by both, Senators Warren and Sanders, and I'm looking forward to hearing more.
And Mayor de Blasio is running.
I can't say that Mayor de Blasio has my support.
All right, to be continued. Tiffany Cavan. Tiffany, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.